Welcome to Victoria Rumble Room, a little show on Vancouver Island that strives to bring you the big stories in British Columbia, Canada, and the wide world. I'd like to say the wide, wonderful world, but a lot of times that's just not the case. As usual, I'm Robin Adair, and I'm joined by John Jurisic, the Croatian sensation across town.
Hello. Hello.
Johnny, there is so much going on, and so much of it's disturbing. Let's lead off with Ukraine.
So much is so right. Every time we start the show, we see there's so much. And then there's so much more. This Ukrainian scenario, this Ukrainian war, tragedy on so many levels. The Russians are now dive bombing civilians in major cities like Kiev, and with Iranian, oh, come on, you've got to be kidding, with Iranian kamikaze drones. Give me a break. Many of these weapons are being shot down, but many are not. And they're reaching and killing people in residential areas. In fact, recently, a young couple was killed, Robin. The pregnant wife was carrying their first child. War is so ugly, but it's always been ugly. Killing people, ugly. Hard to see it happen in front of our eyes, and I wish this one would end. It's terrible, terrible to see Iran getting directly involved.
Absolutely. Iran has been a rogue nation for quite some time, really since the Ayatollah Khomeini took over. I guess that was in the late 70s. And what we have now is Iranians reaching out and helping the Russians. The Russians don't have many friends. The Iranians don't have many friends, but they're helping each other. It's very disturbing. And of course, Iran have a lot of problems with women right now in their own backyard. We have a situation the last couple of weeks. There's been marchers, many of them women, have been protesting the forced wearing of the hijab, the Muslim headscarf. People are being shot in the streets. And a woman who began this protest was hauled off by police. She was taken to a prison. She was beaten to death. And people are furious. And next week, we're going to be talking to a Royal Roads instructor who taught in Iran for 8 years, is very familiar with the situation there, and she's going to talk about some of the injustices in that country. Also, John, some of this has come up in our viewer mail, so we have a couple of letters that touch on this particular issue.
Yeah, it sure has. Richard writes to us to say, Iranian women are finally saying enough. They're treated like second-class citizens, basically like slaves, and are supposed to dress the same. Men wear normal clothes. This is very unfair.
And, you know, we do have other opinions on this. Adam, for example, suggests we shouldn't be focused on these issues like Iran, but rather on issues closer to home. And he writes, hypocrites. Canada ignores First Nations issues about missing and murdered Aboriginal women. And what about the Highway of Tears in BC? Hypocrites. Well, we do appreciate different points of view, and we always encourage you to write letters. I do think it's important for us to show the plight of our First Nations, but equally show the plight of people around the world, and we'll continue to do that on this show, John. And one of the things that we're also worked up about, of course, is the BC doctor shortage.
Man, are we ever, Robin? BC Healthcare Matters is sponsoring a rally this Saturday, the 22nd at noon. The province has made some moves, including a 70-point plan and more money for new doctors graduating from medical school. But still, 1 million and growing British Columbians still don't have a family doctor, Robin. This just isn't acceptable. A lot of people came out last spring when we had our last rally at the legislature. I had the opportunity to MC. It was great fun. I rallied the crowd and reminded politicians what's at stake here. How are you feeling today on BC Family Physicians Day? You know, Robin, it's always a tad awkward watching yourself do stuff on tape. Anyway, that was a lot of fun. The latest event that we're having on Saturday, October 22nd, is called We Need Doctors Now. Joining us to talk about why it's important to keep up the pressure on government is Camille Curry from BC Healthcare Matters. Let's zoom her in. Well, now joining us in the Rumble Room is our good friend, Camille Curry. Camille, this Saturday, the 22nd of October, some people will see this and come out. Some will see this interview after the fact and ask, why is this important? We keep hearing the government making announcements about more money and more stuff for the healthcare system. What still needs to happen?
Yeah, so I think you're quite right. We've heard about a lot of announcements lately, but I would flag for people, I guess, that many of the announcements do relate more to acute care. And acute care means hospitals, it can mean long-term facilities, it can mean a lot of things outside of family doctors. And so what we're really pressing forward for, because our goal and our mission is a timely access to a family doctor for everyone in British Columbia. And unfortunately, so far, the actions that have come forth aren't moving that forward for us. So that's the reason why we are continuing to pushing forward, holding rallies, sharing information, because it still has not been presented to us, it seems, as the #1 priority of this government. And we truly believe it needs to be that.
There's a 70-point plan that the health minister proudly unfolded, and it had a lot of things for a lot of different aspects of the healthcare system, and a lot of overlap, I guess, where you have pharmacists now able to dispense prescriptions and things like this. They also made announcements about a lot more training seats for new doctors, and they have added incentives for doctors graduating to stay in family practice, and have had some success with that. I guess in a measured way, you must be pleased about that, but it doesn't go far enough.
Yeah, that's a really good way of explaining it. You know, when people ask me, well, is this steps in the right direction? Are you happy about this? My response tends to be, when I look at these things, I ask myself, does this achieve our goal? Does this achieve access to a family doctor for everyone? And if that action doesn't fully achieve that, then I'm not fully satisfied. But as you said, these are steps in the right direction. They absolutely are. People are going to retire. We're going to need more doctors. That's simple math. So I'm really glad to see them addressing that. But what they need to continue to remember to focus on is how do we retain these very valuable family physicians that are already practicing in British Columbia. And so far, again, the 70-point plan didn't address that. And so that's where our concern lies, is that our pressure is not going to let up, because we need to make sure that that is addressed. We want to make sure that those that are here stay here, so they are retained. We also want to make sure that we can attract doctors back to our province that have chosen to leave, or doctors that are currently here but are choosing to not even practice. We want to see measures in place to attract them back into the field that they, so much that they loved, they chose to go into because they wanted to provide cradle to grave care to residents of BC.
Let's switch again to the rally at the Ledge on the 22nd, Camille. Symbolically, perhaps likely more than symbolically, you're going to have doctors on the lawns of the legislature providing examinations. Extraordinary. And you'll also be looking for more members. How has BC Healthcare Matters grown across the province? Are there more Camille Currys taking the reins in different parts of BC?
Well, I'm not sure if we can handle too many more of me, but we've definitely got some amazing volunteers that have come forward from across the province, and we are so grateful to them, because this is a province-wide issue, and so we need representation across the province. Going back to your point about the doctors that'll be present at our rally, I mean, it honestly makes my heart just feel so full, because I find it is such a true testament to these doctors and their passion for their profession, as well as their passion for wanting to take care of the residents of British Columbia. So it's fabulous. It's spectacular, really, that we're going to have over a dozen family doctors give up their time for free to come down and just chat with residents and see how they can help guide them through this, quite frankly, dysfunctional system right now.
So always pleased to see these steps being taken to nudge government in the right direction. We have a big doctor shortage. Something needs to be done about it, and a lot more action needs to take place. But changing topics now, John, let's get into the I think, the elephant in the room, if you like, certainly in British Columbia, where we've just had a changing of the guard across the province on so many fronts with civic governments. I think we have 37 new mayors alone, or 37 mayors may have lost their jobs, including several on southern Vancouver Island. And it includes some big names on the lower mainland as well. Ken Sim is now the Vancouver mayor, and he's the first Chinese mayor of Vancouver, first Chinese Canadian mayor, sweeping to power with his entire ABC slate and a platform of housing affordability and public safety. My old friend Mike Klassen is now on that council, and that's nice to see that. Issues like housing and public safety certainly have come up in many communities, and as a result, heads have been rolling.
Have they ever? Some big names, Robin, like Stu Young in Langford after 30 plus years on the job. And Doug McCallum in Surrey is out. Surrey's Brenda Locke, the former BC Liberal cabinet minister, defeated Doug McCallum because the public decided development has been unchecked. Okay. Interesting trend. The people in Surrey are also concerned about the process of throwing out the RCMP, Robin.
Yeah, so that's being looked at again now. The province has made some noises that they are willing to look at that being reversed. The RCMP indeed may stay in Surrey. So lots of issues behind these races. David Screech is out in View Royal. Who knew? And Rob Martin defeated in Colwood. Fred Haynes unseated in Saanich. Very close race. And that's Dean Murdoch, the new mayor there in Saanich. And here to talk about these shifting tides in BC civic politics, a great friend of the show, Dr. Michael Prince. Let's zoom him in. Now joining us once again in the Victoria Rumble Room, an old friend of the show, Professor Dr. Michael Prince, Lansdowne Professor of Social Policy at the University of Victoria. I'd like to get all that out. Great to have you on the program again.
Great to see you both. Thank you, John and Robin. Happy to be here.
Now, it just in the wake of all this civic activity and these mayors losing their positions and councils shifting all over the place, it seemed to me, Michael, that it was housing and public safety was near the top of a lot of the lists right across the province. So do you feel that this was happening because these things weren't already being dealt with? Were they not being tackled urgently enough? Or were people just getting fatigued with the people they had in their civic seats?
I think it's a bit of both. I mean, it's interesting. You look back to the last election of municipalities in 2018. I moderated some all-candidate meetings in that election. I moderated a couple in this election in 2022. And what I noticed, Robin, was a shift into focus. There was much more attention on public safety and crime. You just think back a couple of years ago, we were hearing about politicians speaking, some politicians at least, talking about defunding their police departments, right? And these radical shifts. That largely disappeared. I didn't hear, I mean, there was some of it in the province, but it really dropped off. So I think you're right. In the last couple of years, there was a shift back to, I think, the Freedom Convoy phenomenon across the country. I think the civil disobedience, the disrespect for the rule of law that shocked a lot of Canadians, not just in Ottawa, but in other parts of the country. I think, and there was just a sense, I think even pre-COVID, but certainly amplified during COVID, a sense of unease that certain downtown cores across the province weren't as safe or weren't as pleasant or clean or welcoming as they were. And we've seen that in letters to the editor of newspapers where tourists who come to Victoria say, we used to love coming here. Well, we're not so happy anymore. We're a little disappointed. We're a little uneasy. So I think you're right. That bubbled up the agenda in a lot of places as being a top issue. In a few places where I thought it might be bigger, it wasn't, but it was certainly there. Climate change, climate action was always there, certainly on the West Coast. That's a prominent issue for a lot of politicians and the public. That was there, but housing affordability. The other one that was interesting was healthcare. Now, historically, way back when in the 1910s, 20s, and 30s, municipalities did play a major role in healthcare in this country, but that was before the welfare state was created, and we got Medicare and national, federal, provincial programs. People were asking questions of municipal candidates in a way that I hadn't heard forever. What are you going to do about the doctor shortage? How are you going to make sure we have a nurse practitioner in our community? What are you going to do about access to clinics? And it's like, you're asking the government with the least amount of power and money to deal with probably one of the biggest public policy challenges in the country. But nonetheless, people wanted to know, and some candidates, as you know, even in Victoria, the two leading mayoral candidates spoke out on that, Marianne Alto and Stephen Andrew, about, well, maybe we can do things for tax breaks, and we try to make it a little more attractive for people to move and stay in our municipalities. We certainly heard it even in small towns like Port Hardy and very modest municipalities. Try to be creative and saying, how can we get a nurse practitioner to come and live in our area? What can we do to make that happen? So these were surprises to me. It wasn't the classic potholes and dog licenses or sort of classic some stuff on infrastructure, but that's always the elephant in the room, is what are you going to do with the hundreds of millions of dollars of backlog in water supply or storage, sewage. It's not the glamorous stuff, but those are the shock issues with the big price tags. And
Michael, let me just sort of interrupt here, because this is fascinating. Always great to see you. Always great to hear your thoughts. Such an honor to have you on the show. And rather than go into sort of the nitty-picky of person X winning by 11 or person Y upsetting, let's go into maybe some of the higher level consequences of what happened, about some of what might be bigger political groups pushing agendas at the municipal level. Let me provide some context here. So in the Western communities, like with, wow, what happened there? A lot of people were surprised to see mayors of Colwood, View Royal, Langford defeated, especially Stu Young. Are you kidding? In Langford, 30 years in office. An anti-development movement seems to be gaining strength in BC, or at least Lower Vancouver Island, along with a green movement, especially among younger voters. Are political tides like this part of a younger generation finally becoming more politically active?
I think it is. I mean, we thought that voter turnout might be strong. It actually dipped in a lot of places. It popped up a bit in Langford, but which was a low of 18%, I think, in the last election. So almost anywhere but up there, right? So it went up to, I think it was 24%. So a modest increase, but on election night, when we were all sort of going, wow, history's been made here on Vancouver Island with the defeat of Stu Young in Langford, historic result. I said, in many ways, he's a victim of his own success. He grew that city, he promoted it, he boosted it, and it grew enormously, and it expanded, and the new development. And with that came younger people and a different mix of people and different expectations. And in a way, 30 years is a long time in politics, a really long time, particularly in democracies. And so inevitably there was going to be. And what I found interesting, John, was, you were closer to the ground on that campaign than I was, but the idea people were saying, we're not anti-development, we want to tap the brakes. We want more sustainable, now code words like we want more sustainable growth or more responsible growth, more balanced growth, coupled with we want City Hall to be more transparent and more responsive to community engagement. I heard that a lot across a lot of municipalities. So it's not a thing. And I think part of that, Robin and John, reflects COVID. I noticed that, with lockdowns, council meetings were not open to the public. They were virtual. The opportunity for residents to actually interact face-to-face with staff was greatly reduced, with their elected officials was greatly reduced. And so there was a real sense of disconnect. So in some ways, I would say to people who maybe got beaten or shocked on the result, some of this isn't personal. Some of this, I think, was quite systemic or societal, and the fatigue, the angst associated with COVID, and also the sense of disconnection, and it's just sort of a general malaise or dissatisfaction. And along came this election, or set of elections, and David Screech, Stu Young, we had some longtime mayors suddenly get knocked off.
What I would like to ask you about is something more global. I couldn't help but notice Kevin Falcon looking very happy about the outcome in the Lower Mainland, seeing a sweep of a pro-business group, the ABC Slate in
Yeah.
Vancouver, and Ken Sim, the first Chinese Canadian to become the mayor of Vancouver. And Falcon's saying, he's not saying that this is meaning that the BC Liberals, or what they're going to call that, I guess, in the future. What is it? The BC United are going to be the next provincial party. But he was pleased to see the shift. Are you seeing? Is it classic that we're seeing a business shift on the Lower Mainland and other parts of BC, and arguably a shift to more the center left on the island, which has always been kind of tradition? In other words, it's not a big shock that these things have happened the way they've had in the same province at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, as you know, Robin, people often think Vancouver Island's almost a different province when we talk about, well, what are the BC results? And you always say, well, there's different parts of BC with different results. The interior up north. I mean, we have some very strong regionalism in this province. Not surprising given the size of it, the diversity of the populations. But I think you're right. I think I watched some of the coverage Saturday night, and you could see when Liberal Party representatives or Liberal pundits were being interviewed, they were struggling to keep the smiles from getting too big on the TV screen. I think they were feeling very pleased with the results. And when you get someone like Dave Eby, who's the presumed next premier, come out to endorse the incumbent mayor in Vancouver, Kennedy Stewart, a well-known former federal NDP MP, to get taken down as handily as he did, that was a major defeat. And Mr. Eby kind of wore that too. He took a bit of a hit on that. So I think you're right. There's a shift to the center right. How far the shift is, and how long that, and how much that translates into provincial politics is always, another question. If, for example, there was to be a provincial election sooner rather than later, this would be an argument. If you were advising Mr. Eby and his people, well, you might want to wait a little while. Let the heat of this cool off. If you were thinking about a quick snap election in the spring, maybe not. You've got a mandate. People maybe don't really want a provincial election. Put your own stamp on this government. Bring in a budget or two. We'll see.
Fascinating to hear from Michael Prince. Always fascinating to see how the political landscape is shifting. Younger voters are angry and upset about housing they can't afford, wages they can't attain, climate change they can't control. One local mayor who managed to hang on to her seat was Esquimalt Barb Desjardins. A common interview on the Victoria Rumble Room, we asked her about the role of civic government when it comes to global issues like the environment or social housing.
We're the closest to the people. And so we have that ability to affect change because of that closeness. And all of those large issue items that you just mentioned, we have the ability to mobilize people to make change with. In terms of what I see is happening in the region as the main topics, absolutely housing is an issue. Absolutely affordability is an issue. And the environment and healthcare.
You say the environment. What aspects of the environment? I mean, I always think about the environment of even Canada changing its environmental ways as a small percentage of the overall world environment. I mean, what can we do on a regional or civic basis that's going to make a particularly big difference in terms of our environment, Barb?
Well, I'm talking about climate change action and climate change mitigation. And again, municipalities have control on how new housing, and so how that is regulated in terms of energy efficiency. We have control of transportation issues. So again, we can influence how people are transiting around the region through building infrastructure for active transportation. The third part is around mitigation of the challenges that we're seeing in terms of more severe storms, hotter summers, those sorts of things, and providing ways that people can reduce their exposure to those things.
I'm interested to hear you put this as a very high priority. Not to say it isn't a priority for all of us in the human race and for the world, but for a municipality and what we pay our taxes for, I would have assumed one of the top things on your list and the list in the region would be public safety and the crime problem and policing, which is something I know is very big in Esquimalt and Victoria. You've talked about wanting to maybe pull out of the agreement with Victoria and go your own way, or have a regional police force. Perhaps that's the answer. Is a regional police force something everybody should be talking about right now?
Saanich is quite happy with their police force. We heard from West Shore mayors. They're very happy with the RCMP, don't want to change. Oak Bay is happy with their model. So it's left to Victoria and Esquimalt on this one. And so it's not really a regional discussion. Even at UBCM, we're not hearing that the special committee's report really had any reverberation around the idea of regionalization for policing. So in Esquimalt, definitely, that is a big challenge for us. And we have developed a process to move forward with it. We are hopeful to have some answers for change in front of the province before the end of next year.
We wish Barb Desjardins and her Esquimalt Council all the best. Congratulations to all the victors across British Columbia, all the many victors, people who are going to now be held accountable by the Rumble Room, and hopefully we can have some of these folks on the show. We'd love to see Marianne Alto or Dean Murdoch, lots of these people we'd like to meet and hear what they're going to do in different regions of our area, and of course in other areas of the province as well. One more thing to mention, a lot of civic politicians upset about this catch and release system through our courts, where criminals get arrested, they go to jail, and they're out the same day. There's no seems accountability anymore if you break the law. And David Eby was the Attorney General. He didn't seem to deal with it. Now the acting Attorney General, Murray Rankin, has traveled to Ottawa. He's come back. He says Ottawa understands the problem. But the opposition leader, Kevin Falcon, says, in fact, not too long ago, Murray Rankin was singing off a different song sheet.
David Eby has been the NDP Attorney General since day one of this NDP government over 5 years ago. And during that time, he's overseen an explosion of a public safety crisis where repeat violent offenders are out assaulting British Columbians with virtually no consequences. And now that he's off running for leadership, the current Attorney General, Murray Rankin, is trying to defend the indefensible. And now he and Mike Farnworth, the Solicitor General, are flying back east because they're trying to demonstrate to British Columbians that, oh boy, we're going to take this argument to the feds as if it's their fault. But what they're really doing is arguing about a bill called Bill C-75 that was passed in 2019. And Bill C-75 provided the least restrictive form of bail possible for criminals. And interestingly, Murray Rankin was a member of Parliament in 2019 when that bill was brought before the House. And guess what? He was enthusiastic about it. He said, I quote, "The bail reform provisions are exemplary," end of quote. And he further went on to say, it requires that the least onerous form of release be imposed, and that's a good thing, end of quote. That's Murray Rankin. And guess what? He actually voted against it because, and this is shocking, it didn't go far enough for him. He wanted it to be even softer on criminals. And so the fact that he's going to Ottawa pretending to British Columbians that they're going to argue against the bill that he didn't think went far enough, what a joke.
Interesting to hear from Kevin Falcon. He admits what's happened in the civic elections may have no bearing on the next provincial election, but it is interesting to see the tide shifting back and forth. And the NDP leadership race is also heating up. So lots of things going on right now. And John, with that said, it's almost time to say goodbye. Quickly, a word on how people can follow and support our nonprofit Rumble Room project.
Exactly, our volunteer nonprofit project. Certainly, a ton of people jump onto our main communication vehicle, that being our Facebook page, and we get a ton of comments, and we really appreciate them. Thank you. Keep them coming. We also have a lot of activity on our Twitter page. as well as all of our interviews housed and inventoried on our YouTube site. And we also have another News and Views Facebook group in which you can contribute to your events and your opinions. We're also on Instagram, and we are also on TikTok. It's been a fascinating show. Wow, what an election. Wow, all the stuff going on. I'm looking forward to so much more next week, Robin. And for now, I'm your Croatian sensation, John Jurisic.
And all I can say is, wow, because you said wow several. I got to say it at least once. I'm Robin Adair, and rumble on.